Okay, so the directions are for 13 through 16 that we need to find the unit tangent and unit normal vectors T of t and N of t, and then we need to use Formula 9 to find the curvature. Okay, and you asked me to work part B, 13b. I've got to work part of A to work part of B because we need, if you'll notice, this is Formula 9 right here. This is the curvature. And it says that I have to use the derivative of t, the length of the derivative of t divided by the length of the derivative of r of t. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find t of t. Okay, and I went ahead and wrote that formula out for you right here also, so we could use it. Now, I'm not going to find N of t on A since you didn't ask me to do A, but I do need to find T of t to start with. So I'm going to take T of t, and I know that T of t is R prime of t over the length of R prime of t. Okay, and more than likely what's giving you trouble is the length of R prime of t. Okay, so if I find T of t, I need to take the derivative of r, and I know that r of t, they gave me a number 13, is t, 3 cosine of t, and 3 sine of t. And remember, these are what's in front of our vectors I, j, and k, and we're going to take the derivative with respect to t, okay? So that means that r prime of t is going to equal 1, comma, because the derivative of t is just 1, because the derivative of x is just 1. Then the derivative of 3 cosine t is going to be 3 times the derivative of cosine t, which is negative sine t, and then 3 times the derivative of sine t, which is cosine t. Okay? So that means that r prime of t is going to equal 1, negative 3 sine t, and then 3 cosine t. Okay? Now, you'll notice T says that if I want T of t here, capital T of t, I need R prime of t, and then I've got to divide it by the length of R prime of t. So we need to find the length of R prime of t. Now, we go ahead and find this length just like we normally do. These are the coefficients of I, j, and k. So we're going to take the square root of the coefficients of I, j, and k squared. And yes, that does mean include the sine t and the cosine t. So I have 1 squared plus negative 3 sine t squared plus 3 cosine t squared. Okay, so that means the length of r prime of t is going to equal the square root of 1, and then I have plus 9 sine squared t, because negative 3 squared is positive 9, and then sine t squared is just sine t squared, plus 9 cosine squared t. Okay, now here's where you may be getting a little bit lost. There's a trig property inside of here. I've got that 1, and I can pull this 9 out. I can factor a 9 out from the sine squared t plus cosine squared t. And there's an old trig property that you probably didn't learn well in Miss Chappa's class. Yep, that was a hit to Miss Chappa, but moving on. That's going to give me 1 plus 9, and if you'll remember, or you can look it up, sine squared t plus cosine squared t actually equals 1. So I wind up having the square root of 1 plus 9, which tells me that the length of r prime of t actually equals the square root of 10. So now I can find T of t. Scoot this over a little bit. T of t is going to equal, I'll make this a little bigger, well, r prime of t, which is right here. So I've got 1 over the length of r prime of t, which is the square root of 10, comma, negative 3 sine t, well, and that's over the square root of 10. And then I have 3 cosine t over the square root of 10. All right, so that's where they got T of t from in A. Okay, now B wants me to use Formula 9. Well, I know what R prime of t is. the length of that, I've got to find the length of t prime of t. Okay? Well, that means that I need to now find t prime of t. Okay, so t prime of t is going to equal, well, 1 over the square root of 10 is just a constant. That's like saying, what is the derivative of 2? Well, the derivative of any constant is 0. Okay? Now I need the derivative of negative 3 over the square root of 10 sine t. Well, that's just negative 3 square root of 10. That's the number in front. Derivative of sine t is cosine t. Okay? Then I have a positive 3 square root of 10 times the derivative of cosine t, which is negative sine t, because the derivative of cosine t is negative sine t. All right, so that tells me that t prime of t equals, I need to make that a little bigger, 0, negative 3 square root 10, negative 3 over the square root of 10 cosine t, negative 3 over the square root of 10 sine t. All right, now I need to find the length of that. So I'm going to do that just like I did with the r prime of t. And if you'll remember, I need this in a minute. Look, this is going to go right here in this bottom. And then I'm going to need this length of the square root, length of the t prime of t, and that's going to be my numerator. Okay, so now I have the square root, I'll make that a little bigger, of 0 squared plus negative 3 over the square root of 10 cosine t squared plus negative 3 over the square root of 10 sine t squared. Okay, well, that's going to give me the square root of 0 plus 9 over 10, because square root 10 times square root 10 is the square root of 100, which is 10, times cosine squared t plus 9 over 10 sine squared t. Okay, that's going to give me the square root of 0 plus, I'm going to factor that 9 over 10 out again. And inside I've got cosine squared t plus sine squared t. And what did we say that was a while ago? Well, that's my same property that I had here. Right there. Here it is right there. Okay, it's the same. It can flip back and forth around, which gives me the square root of 0 plus 9 over 10 times 1, which gives me the square root of 9. Looks like I put a negative there. 9 over 10, which gives me 3 over the square root of 10, and that equals that length of t prime of t. All right, so now I'm ready to use my formula 9. I've got the length of t prime of t divided by r prime of t. So I know that little curvature formula, or formula 9, is the length of t prime of t over the length of r prime of t. So I go back and I find my parts. T prime of t is 3 over the square root of 10, okay? And that's going to be all over, what was r prime of t? Square root of 10, which winds up giving me 3 over square root 10 times square root 10, which is going to give me 3 over 10. And that should be correct.